Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav, and we will be learning today Mi'ez Hashem Daf Kuf Hey Amid Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Sukkah, and we pick up today on Kuf Dalet Amid Beis in the midst of Siman Tov Reish Lamed Tes Sif Gimel. We left off right before the words of the Ramah, 4 lines down near the beginning of the line. Says the Ramah, Hagah. We should not eat the seudau on the first night of Sukkos in the Sukkah. Again, let's remember, we said that the first night of Sukkos, there's a different chiyuv to eat in the Sukkah than on the rest of Yom Tov. On the first night of Sukkos, there's a mitzvah chiyuvis. It's obligatory. You must have at least a kezayis of pas in the Sukkah on the first night of Sukkah. That's based on the Gzeirah Shava that the Gemara makes between Sukkos and Pesach. Tezvav. It says Chamisha Asar by Sukkos. It says Chamisha Asar by Pesach. Just like on Pesach, we learn from Sukkim that there's a mitzvah chiyuvis to eat matzah on the first night of Pesach. So too on Sukkos, there's a mitzvah chiyuvis to eat in the Sukkah on the first night of Sukkos. Now, because we have such a chiyuv da'araisa to eat in the Sukkah and to live in the Sukkah, we have to be yoytze that mitzvah. Because of that, the Ramah says, "V'lo yochal b'layla harishona," we should not sit down to eat that seudau on the first night of Sukkot, ad sheyehei vadai laila, until it is certainly night. He brings this down from the Orchos Chaim. Furthermore, v'yochal koydem chatzos laila, and we should make sure to eat that seudau before halachic midnight. So you have a zman. You have to make sure it's already Laila, because it has to be Vadai, the Yom Tov of Sukkos. We don't want you to sit down to eat that seudau during Ben Hashmashos. Ben Hashmashos is Safek Yom, Safek Laila. Maybe it's still Erev Yom Tov, and by eating in the Sukkah, you're not Yotze the mitzvah. So you have to make sure to eat the seudau after it's Vadai Laila. We also want you to eat the seudau before Chatzos, and we'll see the reason for that in the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Chaf Hey. Vadai Laila. We have to make sure that it's Vadai Laila when you sit down to eat the seudau. Why? Da'achilas sukkah b'layla rishayna hu dumya da'achilas matzah b'leil Pesach. The mitzvah chiyuvis, the obligation to eat in the sukkah the first night of Yom Tov, is the same as the chiyuv to eat matzah on the first night of Pesach. The ksiv ba, and in the context of the mitzvah of achilas matzah, the pasuk says, "Ba'erev toichlu matzos." You should eat matzos be'erev, in the evening. V'hainu mishetechshach. That means it has to already be night. Ve'emberach ben hashmashos v'achal kezayis. Now, let's say you forgot this halacha. You davened at an early minyan. You davened mincha. You davened ma'ariv early on erev Sukkos. You came home, and it's ben hashmashos. You went into your sukkah, you made kiddush, you washed, you made a leishev, everything, and then suddenly you go, uh-oh, I didn't chazer Mishnah Berurah enough, and I took out a Mishnah Berurah, I brought a Mishnah Berurah with me to the sukkah to chazer some hilchos sukkah, and now I see I was supposed to wait until Vadai Laila, and I didn't. What do I do now? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Sarach lachzor v'lechal kezayis b'layla Vadai. You have to make sure that after Tzeis HaKeichavim, when it's already Vadai Laila, you eat another kezayis. Ben Hashmashos was only a suffix. This is a mitzvah daraisa. In order to be mekayim it has to be Vadai Laila. Aval brichas leishev basukkah lo yivarach shenis, but you're not going to make another bracha of leishev basukkah, the suffix brachas lahakil. We're dealing with two different things over here. On the one hand, we're dealing with the chiyuv daraisa to eat in the sukkah. For that chiyuv daraisa, we're not going to be yoytze that chiyuv daraisa during Ben Hashmashos when it's Safek Yom and Safek Laila. So there's at least a suffix that you still have a chiyuv. You have to eat again. But as far as the bracha, to make a bracha, over there, bracha is the Rabbanon, we say Safek brachas lahakil. Safek brachas lahakil means we don't go ahead and make a bracha when there's only a suffix if we're chayiv to make that bracha. We're not going to be risk bracha levatala. We're not going to risk being Mosi Shem Shamayim levatala, and the chiyuv is only a chiyuv d'Rabbanan. Incidentally, whenever I mention that, I always like to point out that the one bracha that we have that's a chiyuv d'Araisa is Birkas Hamazon. So when you sit down to bench, remember that this is a bracha that you're making that is a mitzvah d'Araisa. It's a bracha d'Araisa. Ois kat l'chavav. The Ramah told us that we should make sure to eat the seudau the first night of Sukkot, kaidem chatzos laila, before halachic midnight. Doesn't mean that you have to finish your seudau before chatzos. You want to farbreng in the Sukkah, you want to sit in the Sukkah, and you want to say Torah, and you want to sing nigunim, gesund heit. This is not, even on Pesach also, we're rushing to eat the afikomen before chatzos. Over here, we don't have to sit down and rush to eat the dessert before chatzos. You can take a long seudau, take as much time as you want, but make sure you start the seudau and you eat your kezayis of pas that you're going to be yotz in the mitzvah with. Make sure you do that before halachic midnight. Why? Explains the Chavetz Chaim again, dum yodamatzah. Again, this is based on the comparison to the chiyuv of achilas matzah. The be'inon sheyechlenu kaidem chatzos, where we learned the halacha is you have to eat the matzah shel mitzvah before chatzos. Kidemuchach b'siman taf ayin zayin sif aleph, like we learned in siman taf ayin zayin sif aleph, and this I believe is based on the comparison between matzah and korban pesach. It says that you're supposed to eat al matzah yisumeroirim yechlu, so the korban pesach comes together with the matzah. The zman of the korban pesach is until chatzos, so the zman of matzah is until chatzos. Ubedieved, im loy achal kain chatzos. B'diavad, if you did not eat in the Sukkah before chatzos, something happened and you weren't able to eat your seudau in the Sukkah before chatzos, chayiv lechal achar chatzos. You have an obligation, you have to eat the seudau even after chatzos. The gamba matzah dina hachi, because that's the halacha by matzah as well. If somehow you weren't able to eat the matzah shel mitzvah before chatzos, you still have a chiyuv to eat it after chatzos. V'yuchal levarach leishev basukah, and you can still make the bracha of leishev basukah. And the Sharetzion points out here in Ois Kat Nun, v'loi hevi k'moyle inyan matzah. In this way, the mitzvah of Sukkah is different than that of Achilas Matzah. Because by Matzah, v'loi hevi k'moyle inyan matzah, in this way it's not similar to Matzah, de'ena yochel levarach al Achilas Matzah la'achar chatzos, where on Pesach, we rather do not make a bracha on the matzah if we don't eat the matzah until after chatzos. So if you didn't get a chance to do moitzi matzah until after chatzos, you don't make the bracha of asher kiddishanu b'mitzvayis of tzivanu al achilas matzah. The hacha lo igriya mishar yoimei, because over here he says you can make a leishev basukah, because we make a leishev basukah every time we sit down to eat in the sukkah for the entire Yom Tov, even when it's not that mitzvah chiyuvis, even when it's only a mitzvah kiyumis, we still sit down and we still make a bracha of a leishev all Yom Tov. Where on Pesach, we don't make a bracha of al achilas matzah all Yom Tov when we eat matzah. We only make that bracha the first night. We don't make it the rest of Yom Tov. So if you missed chatzos by the Seder night, you still have to eat the matzah, but you don't make a bracha. On Sukkot night, if you didn't get a chance to eat a seudau in the Sukkah till after chatzos, you're going to eat a seudau in the Sukkah after chatzos, and you're going to make a leishev. The same way if it was a day of Chalamoid. Okay. I did not finish Ois Kat and Chavav. V'yuchal levarach leishev basukah. Bottom line in the Mishnah Berurah. V'rak she'oz dinoi k'shari mei sukkah. Now the Chavetz Chaim does point out a very interesting thing. Let's remember what we said yesterday. Excuse me. We have learned that all Sukkos long, how much pasta you have to eat in order to have a chiyuv to eat in the Sukkah. All Yom Tov long, that amount is a volume of pas more than the volume of an egg. Yoser mikabetza. If you eat yoser mikabetza more than the volume of an egg, you have a chiyuv of Sukkah. Less than a kabetza, even of pas, you do not have a chiyuv of Sukkah. We said that the first night is different. Because the first night is a mitzvah chiyuvis midaraisa, the first night is more chamor, and you have a chiyuv to eat even a kezayis of pas. If you're going to eat a kezayis of pas on the first night, even though kezayis is less than a kibetza, so theoretically a kezayis of pas doesn't have a chiyuv sukkah, but on the first night it does have a chiyuv sukkah, and therefore also by eating a kezayis you yoytze the mitzvah of sukkah. That's what we learned yesterday. Today we learned that you're supposed to eat the seudau on the first night before halachic midnight. We said, if b'diavad you missed halachic midnight, you still have a chiyuv to go eat in the sukkah. But, says the Chavetz Chaim, after chatzos already there's a difference. After chatzos, halachically, we're going to treat eating in the sukkah like the rest of Yom Tov, not like the first night. And therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah here on the bottom line, V'rak, with the exception, with the caveat, if you're dealing with after chatzos, sha'oz dinoi kishar yimei sukkah. Now we're going to treat this as the rest of Yom Tov, not as the first night of Yom Tov. She'ein levarich leishev basukah, and you can't make a bracha of leishev ad sheyochal yoser mikabetza. Now you have to eat yoser mikabetza, because now it doesn't have the halacha of the first night anymore. So you want to make a leishev basukah? Yes, you can make a leishev basukah just like you do the rest of Yom Tov. But now the chiyuv of sukkah is yoser mikabetza, not a kazayis, not less than a yoser mikabetza. So you're gonna make a leishev. You're gonna have to eat yoser mikabetza. I think I would extrapolate from this Mishnah Berurah that also, in order to be yotze the mitzvah, because mimanavshach, if it's the rest of Yom Tov, there is no mitzvah. All right, but in any case, you're gonna eat yoser mikabetza because you want to make a bracha of a leishev basukah. Okay. Now we finish off the words of the Ramah. Let's go back up into the Shulchan Aruch. V'lo yoichal bayom mechatzos ve'elech, 2 lines from the bottom, right by the Ois Katan Chav Zayin for the Mishnah Berurah. The Ramah says another halacha here. On Erev Yom Tov, v'lo yoichal bayom mechatzos ve'elech, you should not eat on Erev Yom Tov after chatzos. Why? Kedei sheyoichal basukah l'teyavoin. Because we want to make sure that when you go to eat your seudau of a mitzvah daraisa of having a seudau in the sukkah, we want you to eat it b'teyavoin. We want you to eat it with an appetite. It should be a chashuv meal. It should be an enjoyable meal. It should be something, a mitzvah with tam. It should be a lebedika mitzvah, like the Rishiva Zatzal would say, a varma mitzvah you want it to be, and you want to eat l'teyavoin. Dumya, the achilas matzah, just like we find by matzah, that you're not supposed to eat on Erev Pesach, because we want you to eat the matzah shel mitzvah b'teyavoin, because that's the way you do a mitzvah. You do a mitzvah b'teyavoin. We don't want you to sit down to do a mitzvah of achilas matzah when you're full and you're stuffed and you don't want to look at food. What kind of mitzvah is that? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Chav Zayin, mechatzos ve'elech, don't eat after chatzos on Erev Sukkos. Says the Chavetz Chaim, ha'achronim iskimu ledina, when it comes to the halacha l'maisa, the conclusion of the achronim is de'enoi osur, that it's not forbidden to eat, it's not prohibited to eat on Erev Sukkos, ki im mitchilas sha revius achar chatzos hayom. The Ramah said after chatzos, which is halachic midday, technically speaking, the beginning of the 6th hour. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Achronim come to the conclusion that really the Isser is 4 hours later, the beginning of the 10th hour. In regards to Erev Pesach. All of the details that we learned in the context of eating on Erev Pesach, all of the various things that we discussed over there, which you should refrain from, because they will prevent you from eating a seudau b'teyavoin, shaykh gam kan, they also apply over here on Erev Sukkos. So over there, the Mishnah Berurah said, you don't wash, you don't eat mine dagon, you don't eat mezainas, grain-based foods, but you want to eat peiros, you want to eat basar, that you could eat. You shouldn't eat an excessive amount if it's going to fill you up. Wine, you could drink a significant amount of wine, because that actually acts as an appetizer. It makes you hungry. A small amount of wine you should not drink, because a small amount of wine fills you up. Uchedoime ayin sham. Okay, now we go to Siv Dalid on the bottom line of Kuv Dalid Amud Beis in the Shulchan Aruch. Says the Mechaber, Kol Shivas Hayamim, for all 7 days of Yom Tov, Koirei, you would read the Torah HaKadoshah. So let's say you're being Mavis Sedra, you learn your Chumash, Veloimed, and you learn Torah, B'Soich HaSukkah, inside the Sukkah. Says, no, there is no Mishnah Berurah here yet. I think there was something here from the Aruch HaShulchan. Let me just see quickly. Yeah, I want to just read quickly here from the Aruch HaShulchan. The Mechaber just told me here, for all 7 days of Yom Tov, you should learn Torah in the Sukkah. What is that based on? So if you read the Aruch HaShulchan says, Kol Shivas Hayamim Kairei V'Loimed B'Saych HaSukkah, exactly the words of the Mechaber. All 7 days of Yom Tov, you learn Chumash, you read Torah, and you learn Torah in the Sukkah. And he says over here, V'zeu gamkein b'chlal teishvu ke'ein taduru, because that is included in the chiyuv of teishvu ke'ein taduru. That's part of living in your house. What do you do in your house? One of the things you do in your house is you sit and learn. So now the sukkah is your home. So if you want to sit and learn in the sukkah. So this is an Indian of teishvu ke'ein taduru. So kol shivas hayamim karev v'loimed b'saych HaSukkah, continues the Mechaber on the top line of Kuf Hey Amud Aleph, Ukishemevin umedakdek b'ma sheyikra. But if you're learning more be'iyun, so ukishemevin, if you're working to understand what you're learning, so now you're not only being maris sedra, or you're not only chazering the daf, so you already learned the daf, you already ma'ayin in the daf, you already figured the daf out. Now you're quickly, reading through what you already know. That's kairei v'loimed. But ukishemevin umedakdek, when you're learning more be'iyun b'ma sheyikra v'yilmoid, what you're reading and what you're learning, yachol lilmoid chutz l'sukkah, that you could do outside of the sukkah, kedei shetei daitoim yusheves alav, so that your mind should be settled. Iyun needs a more of a settled, comfortable, non-distracted mind, so that you could do inside the home if the ambiance and the environment in the home is more conducive to learning be'iyun and to being able to concentrate. Let's see what the Mishnah Berurah says over here. When you're learning be'iyun, what the Mechaber wants to say over here is, da'az, in that case where you're being ma'ayin, toiv lo yoiser lilmai babayis, then it's better to learn in the house, sheha'avir yafaloi laharchiv daitoi, because the air, the ambiance, the avira in the house is better, it's more conducive, laharchiv daitoi, to have a broadened mind and to be able to concentrate and think. Now, he brings this down over here, Ois Katan and Beis. He's quoting a Rashi and Av Chavches Amid Beis. There are those that say that one of the pshatim in this is that in days gone by, the sukkah was typically small, it was tight, it might be dark. Even when I go back to my childhood, which doesn't seem to be so long ago, considering that I'm so young. I mean, how long ago? I must be talking like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. This is just baby powder over here. So when I think back to my childhood into a sukkah, how did we light our sukkahs? Everybody lit their sukkah the same way. Everybody had one of those hanging work lights with an incandescent 60-watt bulb in it. And it seems that this was kind of like a pseudo chiyuv to have a 60-watt bulb. And it didn't matter if your sukkah was 4x8, 8x12, or 16x20. Everybody had the same one work light with the same 60-watt incandescent bulb. So the sukkah was a dark place. And very often the sukkah was also small. This predates lighter sukkah and sukkah outlet and sukkah up and sukkah down and presto sukkah and instant sukkah and 24 sukkah and every type of prefabricated, easy to build sukkah, pop-up sukkah that exists. In those days, how did you make a sukkah? You grabbed some 2x4s and you found some wood. You brought a couple of sheets. There was no Home Depot. So you didn't go to Home Depot and buy every kind of bracket and every kind of screw and every kind of piece piece of lumber that you needed. Everything was a pain in the neck. You had to go to the lumber yard, and then everything was complicated. So you got some 2x4s and you got some wood. You knocked up a sukkah, some paneling, some this, some that, mismatched walls, and what have you, and you made a sukkah. Sometimes the sukkah was also very small, so the sukkah was made for the men. The men came down and they ate in the sukkah. So now you want to go down to the sukkah. The sukkah is dark. The sukkah is tight. It's small. And you want to go learn and you want to go prepare an iyun shiur. And you want to have svarim. And you need all your svarim and you need everything else. Especially nowadays, you need your cameras and you need your lights and you need your microphone. So you want to go do all of this in the sukkah? You're not going to be able to do all of this in the sukkah. So when it says that the avir is yafaloi lahachiv daitoi, it means the air. You need an airy space. You need a big open space to be marchiv daitoi. You can't go down to tzikvetch the little sukkah and go be ma'ayin and tzikvetch the little sukkah. It doesn't work. And that's what the Mishnah Berurah seems to be saying over here. Let's go to the next Mishnah Berurah. Ois katan chav tes miyusheves alav. You want to have daitoi miyusheves alav. Your mind should be settled. Says the Chavetz Chaim, "Hakol lefi ha'inyan." We have to analyze the context of the situation. De'im daitoi miyusheves basukah. If you do have a nice, beautiful sukkah, and it is daitoi miyusheves, and the truth is, like some of the Mefarshim say, sometimes it's punk fakert. Sometimes the sukkah is more daitoi miyusheves alav. Because if you have a small apartment and you have 7 kids, running around in the apartment, it's not daitoi miyusheves alav in the apartment. Adarabah, go down to the sukkah, there's nobody crawling under your feet in the sukkah, so then it's daitoi miyusheves alav in the sukkah. Sheyesh lo menucha sham, if you can have more menucha in the sukkah, learn in the sukkah. V'leparbim mostly sheyesh kar. Chavetz Chaim says sometimes it's cold. If you want to go have a morning seder in the sukkah and it's cold, you're going to be mitzvah. So in that case, who potter? I see I underlined over here. I don't remember why. I wrote down Dirshu Mishnah Berurah footnote number 34. Oh, I remember that footnote. We'll do it in a minute. Okay. Chavetz Chaim says, how about if the sukkah is very conducive to learning? You have menucha, and you have LED lights, and you have everything else, and it's taka very comfortable, and you could go learn there, and you could be ma'ayin there. Efsher, but the problem is that you got to schlep all your svarim. You want to be ma'ayin, you need a shas, so okay, so you'll bring a 6-volume shas. You need a shas, and you need a chamisha Torah, and you need the right couple of volumes of Shulchan Aruch, and you need an Aruch HaShulchan, and you need a Dirshu Mishnah Berurah, and you need a Rambam, and you need a set of Mishnah Berurah, right? This is my recording studio over here. It's not my study, but I do come up here sometimes to prepare up here. So what do I have? Just right now, I have a full set of Mishnah Berurah. I have 2 volumes of Shulchan Aruch. I have a Rambam. I have an Aruch HaShulchan. I have a couple of Gemaras. I have my tablet with the art scroll Shas on it. That's what I use for a Shas. I have a Chamisha Torah. I have a Tanakh. So you need a lot of Svarim. And it's going to be a big tercha to go schlep all the Svarim down to the Sukkah and then schlep them back up again. Now, it's very hard to call that mitzvah because that has nothing to do with the Sukkah. You're not mitzvah because of the Sukkah. But the Mishnah Berurah says, Efsher the potter, it's possible that you would be potter based on that. Achein, however, says the Chavetz Chaim, im yesh lo makom la'nicham sham kol hachag, if you could set up a little svarim shrank in the sukkah, and you have a shlak, so you don't have to worry that your svarim are going to get ruined if it rains, chayiv, then you take a chayiv de ein zetorach. Do what you could do to set it up so that there shouldn't be a problem. Now, the Aruch HaShulchan over here writes like this. He says, again, Kol Shivas Yamim Karev Eloimid B'Sech HaSukkah, V'im Tzarich Harbe Svarim L'Limudai, if you need a lot of Svarim for your learning, Yitleim L'Sukkah, you should bring them to the Sukkah. V'af al pi shezeu alav teirach, even though that's going to be rough, it's going to be a pain. Mikamakom lo b'shvil zeh yachal lifter atzmai m'sukkah. You can't pater yourself from Sukkah because you have to schlep your Svarim to the Sukkah. The same way, others say, you can't pater yourself from sleeping in the sukkah. Let's say it's at a time and place where you talk out a chiyuv. Forget all the pturim that we learned about with your wife, and this is that you have a private sukkah. You could be in the sukkah with your wife, but it's cold. Okay, so it's I'm not talking about where it's 30 below, where it's not possible to sleep in the sukkah. It's cold, meaning it's 60 degrees. So Teshu came to Duru. You live in your house. If it's 60 degrees in your house, if it's 60, 65 degrees during the winter at night in your house, you live in your house. You don't abandon your house. What do? You have a blanket. So take a blanket down to the sukkah. Teshu came to Duru. In your house, you sleep with a blanket. The sukkah, you'll sleep with a blanket. So a guy will say, come on. I got to go bring my mattress to the sukkah, and I got to bring my blanket to the sukkah, and I need 3 pillows. I got to bring 3 pillows to the sukkah. Yeah, Teshu came to do. Guess what? To eat in the sukkah, you need a table. So I gotta bring my table, I gotta bring chairs, I gotta bring dishes. Yeah, you do. You have to set your sukkah up. That's no different than saying, I'm a mitzvah. Sukkah, I gotta go put up schach, I gotta put up walls. Yeah, you do. That's the mitzvah. The mitzvah is you gotta build a sukkah. And you gotta build a sukkah that you could live in. So you gotta bring a table and you gotta bring chairs. And if you have to sleep, you gotta bring a mattress and you gotta bring a blanket, you gotta bring pillows. And if you have to learn, you have to bring your svarim. That's the approach here of Derech HaShulchan. Derech HaShulchan says, well, you can't potter yourself from sukkah just because it's gonna be a schlep to go bring your svarim. If there's a chiyuv to learn in the sukkah, Teshu came to Duru. So if you need your svarim, you need your svarim. Now, to balance this, the Shulchan Aruch HaRav does say that in such a case where it's a tircha to bring your svarim, yachal lilmod chutz l'sukkah. Shulchan Aruch HaRav, and I think that's why the Mishnah Berurah over here, the Mishnah Berurah says his words were Efsher the potter. I think he's coming off of the Shulchan Aruch HaRav. I think that's where he's coming from. He's coming from the Shulchan Aruch HaRav because the Shulchan Aruch HaRav suggests that it could be such a ptur. Aruch HaShulchan clearly doesn't like it. Now, the Aruch HaShulchan goes weiter, and he says, like I read before, V'zeu gam kein b'chlal Teshu came to Duru. The chiyuv is Teshu came to Duru, and I think the reason the Aruch HaShulchan is saying it over here because he's stressing the point that I just made. This is no difference than the chiyuv to bring your table and chairs, and it's no difference than your chiyuv to bring a mattress and blanket and pillows. So you also have to bring your svarim. However, the Aruch HaShulchan says what we learned over here in the Mechaber, Omnam, im lefi oimek iyunai b'limudai, if based on the iyun you're going to do in your learning, kashalai ha'iyun b'sukkah, if it's difficult for you to be ma'ayin when you're in the sukkah, yachal lilmai b'beisai, then you could learn in your house, kevan shalimud zeh iyav shalai b'sukkah, because that's not possible to do in the sukkah. If you're doing an iyun that you're not going to be able to do in the sukkah, if you want to go learn the daf, and in order for you to learn the daf, you got to be ma'ayin. You have to figure out Gemara's kasha, figure out the Gemara's teretz, and you might have your Gemara and an art scroll Gemara and a Masifta Gemara, and maybe you have a shiur, and you're going to turn on the phone and you're going to listen to somebody's shiur, and you're working on every step in the Gemara, kasha, teretz, raya, everything else. And you say, I'm not going to be able to do it in the sukkah. I'm going to fall 5 lot behind because I can't do it in the sukkah. Then go do it in the house. And the Aruch HaShulchan says, you know what the ptur is? The ptur is mitzvah. Because it says the Aruch HaShulchan, the kal v'chomer advarim. Adarab, it's a kal v'chomer. The im b'tzar aguf amru de mitzvah potter min sukkah. If when it comes to physical discomfort, when it comes to tsar haguf, physical discomfort, you're cold, you're hot, the mosquitoes are bothering you. If physical discomfort is a ptur from the sukkah of mitzvah, the choshkein be'inoi nefesh the Torah, certainly the tsar that you're not going to be able to learn Torah, certainly that's a tsar that potters you. The tsar shetei daitem yusheves alav, because you need to have a settled mind in order to be able to learn. So the Aruch HaShulchan is explaining over here. You want to know what the ptur is? If you can't be ma'ayin, the ptur is a very interesting ptur. The ptur is a ptur of mitzvah. It's a rukniistic ptur of mitzvah, the same way there's a gashmiistic ptur of mitzvah. Now, we spoke about bringing a svarim shrank into the sukkah to facilitate having your svarim. You say it's going to be a big schlep to schlep all the svarim. So have a svarim shrank. So there's an interesting Dirshu footnote over here. Dirshu footnote number 34. He talks about the cold. And he says, V'hamevi tanur l'sukkasai. If somebody brings a heater into the sukkah, kadei sheyuchal lilmoid, so that he should be able to learn, v'lishain ba, and to sleep in the sukkah, kibe beisai, the same way he does in his house, kasav ha-pri begadim she'ashrei loi. The Pri Begadim says, Mamish ashrei loi. Fortunate is the person that does such a thing. V'haisif ha-bikura Yaakov, she'yischakem adam ligroim, sheyuchal lilmoid b'sukkah b'loi tairach. A person should use his chachma, and he should figure out what he has to do to learn in his sukkah and to make it comfortable. Me personally, when I set up the lighting in my sukkah, I make sure that I have very good lighting over the seat where I'm going to learn, because I want it to be very comfortable to learn in the sukkah. Kedei li'ischayev b'mitzvah sukkah v'lo lihipater mimena. V'chala moisif b'kiyam ha-mitzvah, anybody who's moisif, who does whatever he can to make the sukkah comfortable so that he should be able to do as much as he can in the sukkah. Moisifin loy bracha min shamayim. The Bikura Yaakov says, certainly in Shamayim, they will give him more bracha. V'chein nago chavetz chayim v'agrach mibrisk lahachnas taner l'sukkah. They would bring some kind of a furnace, some kind of a heater or an oven into the sukkah to make the sukkah comfortable. Ubetam she'ein chiyuv lahavi taner l'sukkah kedei sheyuchal l'sheves ba af bikar u'chedayim. This is very interesting. Why don't you have a chiyuv to bring a heater into your sukkah? Teishu came to Duru. Do you have a heater in your house? You have a heating system in your house, right? And you have a heating, otherwise it would get cold during the winter, you would have to leave. So what do? Do you say, oh, in the winter the temperature dips, I leave my house, I go to a shelter? No, you have a heating system in your house. So why aren't you mechuyev to have a heating system in your sukkah if you live in a cold climate? A very interesting kasha. So ubetam shein chiyav lavitanu l'sukkah kedei sheyuchal l'sheves ba'af bekor u'chedayma kishem sheyesh chiyav lahavi kli meichel u'chedayma. The same way, like I said, you have to bring your table and you have to bring your chairs. Kedei shetichashev a sukkah kebeisai, to make your sukkah usable like your house. That we understand you have a chiyuv. You have to bring a table, you have to bring chairs, you have to bring dishes, you have to bring forks and spoons and knives. And we don't say, oh, I don't have them and it's a schlep to have them, so I'm potter because of mitzvah. So why don't you have to put heat in your sukkah if it's cold? Bavur b'shal setshuvas ar zarua shekish HaTorah chayva lasois diras aroi. Let's remember, the chiyuv of the Torah to make a sukkah was a chiyuv of a diras aroi. It's a sukkah shel shivas yomim. So when the Torah gave us the chiyuv of making a sukkah, the Torah gave a geder. The geder of the chiyuv is the geder of diras aroi. Kavanasa, the intent of the Torah is, kavanasa haisa, sheyesh livnoi sukkah ba'ofen arai. The Torah gufa gave a geder of making a diras aroi. Afim daf noiseha einon meginois legamri, which means that the Torah Akdosha is telling you, you can make, so to speak, shvacha walls. The Torah gave a geder. The Torah didn't say, make a bayis, so you should put up studs every 16 inches and sheetrocket insulation and exterior siding. The Torah said, make a diras haroi. Diras haroi, 4x8 sheet of plywood, a sheet of fiberglass in an aluminum frame. That's part of the geder of the Torah. V'avim gishamim yordim derech haschach. It's behechrich, a flimsy schach. You're not making a tikra. You're not making a roof. You're making schach. It's not the way you make a bayis. Limra yisha yidekach yipatel lepabim me'asukkah. So the geder that the Torah gave you in asiyas hasukkah is a geder that comes together with piturim, with exemptions. The Torah Akdosha understood that the Torah is being mechayev you to make a sukkah where there are going to be times that you're potter from sukkah. Because the Torah said, make a flimsy dira, make a diras haroi. If you make a diras haroi, if I follow the halachas of schach, then yeah, if it rains, I'm going to be potter. The Torah didn't tell you make a diras kva, make a different house for sukkahs, and make a roof so that you should never be potter. No. Torah said make a diras haroi. So there are going to be times that you're going to be potter because it's a diras haroi. V'lo chiva l'shanoi says mivnei sukkah. The Torah is not mechayev you to change the style of the binyan of the sukkah, kidei ligroim shelo yipater me'asukkah, to make sure that you'll never be pater from sukkah. Kishadiras ha'aroi eina maspika. The Torah didn't tell you, make a diras ha'aroi, and then use kunsim to make sure that you'll get away from all of the possible peturim that come together with diras ha'aroi. No, the Torah told you make a diras ha'aroi. If you make a diras ha'aroi, there are going to be times that you're going to be pater. It comes together. It's a package deal. And there's no chiyuv to go ahead and do whatever you can to prevent anything that's going to come together with the fact that it's a diras haroi. So very interesting. What Dirshu is saying over here is that the fact that the Torah was mechayev you to make a sukkah diras haroi, that means that together with that, the Torah understood that together with that, there's going to be p'turim. And you're not mechuyev to use kunsim to avoid all of those p'turim. So then why are you mechuyev to bring mattresses and pillows and blankets? The footnote goes on, Lagabe avos kar muksasais b'bekarmes hakar, but as far as bringing blankets and pillows in cold climates, before the Biur Halacha lekaman, the Biur Halacha is going to tell us if you can bring them into the sukkah and you have a place to store them, you have to bring them in. So what's the chiluk? How come blankets and pillows, yes, tables and chairs, yes, but heater, no? The cost of the Sefer Moedim Izmanim. So the Sefer Moedim Izmanim suggests, he says, it's possible, the chiluk over here is, that's a relatively small tircha. And that is included in the chiyuv to live in the sukkah. When the Torah is mechayev you to live in the sukkah, that means you have to bring tables and chairs and pillows and blankets. That's part of living in the sukkah. And based on that, Kosav the Moedim Izmanim writes, Shem Yochalav Itanu L'Sukkah B'Kalos, if it's very easy for you to bring a heater, Kibizmanenu, like in our days, when you get a little ceramic heater and you just plug it in, no big deal. L'Choyre Chayav L'Aseis Kain, V'Nishar B'Tzarachiyin. Yeah, so interesting. There's an interesting lumdus over here, an interesting back and forth. Okay. Ooh, this is taking longer than I expected. Okay. Let's go weiter. So, second line down in the Shulchan Aruch on Kuf Hey Amud Aleph. So you learn in the sukkah, if you want to be ma'ayin and the sukkah is not conducive, you can go out of the sukkah. We finish off Siv Daled where the Mechaber says, HaMispalil. When it comes to davening, Rotza mispal b'sukkah. If you want, you can daven in the sukkah. Or if you want, you can daven outside of the sukkah. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut limud. Rotza mispal return loymar. What the Mechaber wants to say is the be'ezem makom sheyesh lo menucha yoser lispal b'kavana. Either one, wherever you can daven better with kavana, sham yispal. That's where you should daven. So over here by davening, we don't have a chiyuv of sukkah. By learning, start out in the sukkah. Chiyuv to learn in the sukkah. Teishu kein teduru. You want to be ma'ayin, so then like the Aruch HaShulchan said, you have a Torah of mitzvah. So then you could go be ma'ayin outside of the sukkah. Davening, no chiyuv to daven in the sukkah. You want to daven in the sukkah because somehow it's more conducive to you to daven b'kavana in the sukkah. Maybe you're b'tzila de memenusa. It's easy for you to be mechaven gesundheit, daven in the sukkah. You want to daven outside of the sukkah, daven outside of the sukkah. Continues the Mishnah Berurah, if you have a shul to daven in, then certainly, then you should leave the sukkah and go daven in shul. That's what you do all year. All year you leave the house and you go to shul to daven. And the truth is, I'm not sure why the Chofetz Chaim didn't word it that way, but the truth is that's why there's no chiyuv. There's no chiyuv to daven in the sukkah because that's not teishu kein teduru. Generally speaking, you don't daven in your house. Davening is something you do in shul. It's not something you do in your house. So there's no chiyuv to daven in the sukkah. You want to, because hey, there's a shul, there's a minyan, zecha, you should go to shul. That's what you do all year round. And in Dirshu footnote number 36, he says something over here that reflects back on the question of learning. V'chein the Indian limud HaTorah b'beis HaMedrash. So too, if you're somebody who always learns in the Beis Medrash, kasav v'shulchan aruch harav shal loymid b'beis HaMedrash patur min Sukkah. All year round, you learn in the Beis Medrash. If all year round you learn in the Beis Medrash, so go learn in the Beis Medrash. For you, maybe learning in the house is not Teshu Kain to do. That learning is not something you generally do in the house. I learn in my house all the time. So for me, it's Zichat Teshu Kain to do. I learn in the Sukkah on Sukkahs. And I'll quicker learn in my Sukkah at home than I will to go to the Beis Medrash, unless I need the Beis Medrash. Because all week long, 99.9% of the time, I learn in my house. So okay, so then Teshu Kain to do, I learn in the Sukkah. But if you always learn in the Beis Medrash, so go to the Beis Medrash. Continues the Chavetz Chaim v'Havdalah. When it comes to Havdalah, Mavdil b'Sukkah. You make Havdalah in the Sukkah. Shekein kol hashana Mavdil b'Beisai. Because all year round, that's what you do. You make Havdalah in the house. So Teshu Kain to Duru. Now on Sukkahs, you make Havdalah in the Sukkah. Okay, now we go to Sifhei. Second line down, Kuf Hey Amud Aleph. Yardu Gishamim. If unfortunately rain starts falling on Sukkahs. Hareze nichnas l'saych habayis. You leave the Sukkah and you go inside to the house. Me'emosai mutar lefanois. At what point, how much rainfall do you need so that it should be acceptable halachically for you to leave the Sukkah and go to your house? Says the Mechaber, Mishayerdu l'saych ha-Sukkah tipois. When there are raindrops falling into the Sukkah to the extent she'em yiplu l'saych ha-tavshil yipasel, that if they would fall into the dish that you're eating, into the cooked dish that you're eating, that's what the tavshil is, it would ruin it. Afilu tavshil shall pull. And the shiur is, even a tavshil shall pull. This is some kind of a bean-based dish, and the Mishnah Berurah says that this is a dish that gets ruined very quickly from a little bit of water. Right away it gets ruined. So when do you leave? You leave the Sukkah at the point where rain is falling on, if you would have a dish in front of you. You don't have to have a dish of food in front of you. Maybe you're sitting in the Sukkah and you're learning. But enough rain is falling, shetisrach hamikveh, that if I would be sitting here and I would be eating a bowl of soup, so the rain falling into my bowl of soup, it would ruin my bowl of soup. I wouldn't be eating the bowl of soup anymore. That's already enough that now you can leave the Sukkah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kat Lamed Aleph, Yardu Gishamim. U'gishem shemefanin mitnei Gishamim. The same way the Mechaber is telling you that you leave the Sukkah in the face of rain, what's the Torah to leave the Sukkah in the face of rain? It's mitzvah. And it's not Teshu Kain Taduru. That's why mitzvah is a Torah. If your house had serious leaks and it was raining in your house, you would leave your house. So it's not a functional house. If your Sukkah is no longer a functional house, you can't eat in it because your food is getting ruined. So then it's not a functional house. Then you leave. That's true even if you're not eating. If you're sitting and learning, but enough rain is falling that it's no longer a functional house, because if I wanted to eat a bowl of soup, I wouldn't be able to, so then you can go inside. The same way this Torah applies to rain, the same thing applies to excessive heat. If it's 99 degrees and humid, and Pashut, I cannot tolerate heat. So if it's heat beyond it, you Pashut can't tolerate it. And if you are home and there was a blackout and you didn't have any air conditioning, you would leave and go to your brother, your sister, your parents who have air conditioning. So then you leave the Sukkah as well. Viatushim, or insects. When, some people freak out from a bee. So sometimes you have in the Sukkah, you have a swarm of bees. The bees are just coming and coming and coming. Somebody can't take it. He can't take it. It's a mitzvah. He can go out. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. Even if you are not mitzvah, meaning it's raining, and enough rain is falling that it would spoil your food. You don't care. It's raining on me. I don't mind getting wet. I don't mind. It's like we talk about the yitushim, we talk about the insects and the bees. For many, many years, I had the Sukkos. I had my Rebbe, Rabbi Reuven Feinstein Shlita, eating breakfast on Chalamoid in my Sukkah. He lived together with me in the yeshiva's housing complex, and Me'ez Tam, at that point, he didn't have a sukkah of his own. He was eating by the kids. So he didn't have a sukkah of his own by his apartment. So he ate breakfast by me in the sukkah. I'll never forget, bees would come into the sukkah, and he would have his hand on the table, and a bee would come land on his hand. I remember one time where there were 4 bees walking around on his hand. And he would just sit there. He would see the bees walking around on his hand. He would leave his hand exactly the way it was, and he would eat as if it wasn't there. It wasn't negaya. It didn't, like, totally did not faze him at all. And one time I commented on it, and he said, why should it bother me? It doesn't, they're not going to sting me. Unless I do something to them to make them uncomfortable, they're not going to sting me. So fine. So they want to walk around on my hand, they'll walk around on my hand. So if you could do that, so fine. But now the Mishnah Berurah is saying the rain is not bothering you. You don't care. You're getting rained on. So mitzvah? I'm not mitzvah. But Mishnah Berurah says, "Va'afilo ein adam mitzvah b'kach." Even if the rain is not actually giving you physical discomfort, ela shahamaychel miskalkel b'kach, but the food would get ruined, you're still allowed to leave. In other words, the shiur of Kadesha Tisrach HaMikveh that the Gemara says, the shiur to leave the sukkah because of rain is if your dish would get ruined. That's even if you personally are not mitzvah. And the reason for that is because, like I said, the sukkah is not a functional bias. A bias that much rain comes into is not a functional bias. And the chiv of sukkah is teishu kein taduru. So this is not teishu kein taduru, so you leave. For who adin, says the Mishnah Berurah, is kar, if it's very cold. Shahama'acholim ashmeinim nikroshim lefanov, yachal achla babayis. Let's say you're like me. I told you I can't tolerate heat. Cold doesn't bother me. So you're sitting in the sukkah, and it's cold. It's 40 degrees. Now, it's 40 degrees. If you're eating a meat stew, a fatty meat stew, you know what starts to happen at 40 degrees? The fat starts to congeal. You want to eat a meat stew, you eat hot meat stew with gravy. You don't eat meat stew with slimy, congealed fat. Nobody's going to enjoy that. So certainly the dish is getting ruined. You're not mitzvah. It doesn't matter. If you're sitting in the cold to the extent that the fat on the food is starting to congeal, time to go. And furthermore, says the Mishnah Berurah, Ve'ein tzarich lachzar ad sheyigmar seudasai, and you're not mechuyev to come back until you finish your seudau. Let's say the reason you went into the house is because you're taka eating a beef stew, and taka the fat is congealing, and it's no longer pleasant to eat. So you went inside. But now, when you finish, you're going to have chocolate mousse for dessert. Aha, chocolate mousse, adarabba. If it congeals, if it's thicker, it's even better. So maybe now we should go outside to the sukkah to eat the chocolate mousse. No, you don't go back. Ukamai b'sivav, it's the same like we're going to see, Mitzvah Hashem. In sivav, b'pina mipnei agishamim, somebody who left the sukkah because of rain, she'ein tzarich lachzor, you don't have to go back to the sukkah, ad sheyigmar seudasai, until you finish your seudau, afilu pasuk agishamim, even if the rain stopped. If you leave your sukkah, you go out, you make kiddush, you wash, you come outside, you start eating challah, it starts pouring. It starts pouring, you move everything inside, you sit down by the dining room table. It was one of those storms that lasts a minute and a half. Now it's not raining anymore. You're not mechuyev to go back out. The kaseh b'bikur Yaakov dim efshel l'sakir b'leitar gadol shel yikashu hama'achalim. If there's something you could do, if you taka live in a cold climate where the food starts to get cold very fast, the fat starts to congeal very fast, and you really are not mitzvah, so really you would eat in the sukkah if not for the fact that the food is congealing, and there's something easy you could do to prevent it from happening. You're going to make some kind of a double boiler. So you're going to serve the bowl of beef stew inside a larger bowl of hot water. So the larger bowl of hot water will keep the beef stew hot. So he says, tzarich l'saken, you should do such a thing. All right, it's a little bit long over here, so I guess we're going to have to stop. All right, we're going to have to stop over here. We didn't really get through the page, but Mirza Hashem will try to catch up a little bit. I'm still not afraid that we're at risk of falling behind. I want to make very, very sure to stay on the schedule. So, okay, so be it. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The Sukkos of limud HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shem should send Yeshuas, Refuas, Parnasa, and I've recently added in and Shidduchim to all those in need. The Rebbeinu Shem should be Mezakas. We should finally see the Bias Gerald Tzedek, B'meher v'yameinu, Amen. Be well.